I spent 10 days traveling the Underground Railroad, retracing American Girl Addy Walker's escape to freedom. My journey started on a plantation in Halifax, North Carolina, and ended 340 miles north in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where Addy's story ends. I started mapping out my journey by piecing together some of the clues that were being hinted at in Book 1, Meet Addy by author Connie Porter. Because the narrative of Addy Walker is fictional, but based on research conducted by Porter and Addy's advisory board in order to develop Addy's 6-book series, there were places and trails I simply could not recreate. I also needed this trip to be as functional as possible, so I combined what Porter laid out in the book series with the Underground Railroad Trail curated by the National Park Service. Additionally, there were places that I also wanted to visit, so I added those locations to my journey as well. The clues that I used from the book included knowing that the setting of Book 1 took place on a plantation in North Carolina, and that plantation was near a river, and that the closest plantation to the Stevens plantation where Addy was born is the Gifford plantation, which is near a railroad track. I did look up railroad stations in and around Raleigh, but it was too difficult to figure out when those tracks had been installed. So I had to let go of figuring out where the Gifford plantation might be. According to the American Girl wiki page, the Stevens plantation is located 25 miles north of Raleigh, which would have led me north to the historic Stageville, where the Benahan Cameron plantation is located. However, that plantation is actually 40 miles north of Raleigh. And I wanted to visit Colonial, Williamsburg, Virginia after I left North Carolina. So I decided to visit the Sally Billy plantation in Halifax, since I could not map out exactly where the Stevens plantation was located. The Sally Billy plantation is located 80 miles northeast of Raleigh and 16.5 miles from the Virginia state border, and it's located off of the Roanoke River. Plus, at the Sally Billy plantation, I would have access to a historian, and there was a historically documented trail that was used as a part of the Underground Railroad. Since I knew that once Addy and her mother had made it to Philadelphia, and they were taken to the Freedom Society of Trinity AME Church. And AME stands for African Methodist Episcopal. So I looked up AME Church in Philadelphia and found the Bethel Mother AME Church. And this site is also confirmed on Addy's wiki page. Now that I had my start and my end destinations, I gave myself permission to take liberties in between these two locations and allowed Addy and my own curiosities to lead the way. I started my journey by visiting the North Carolina State Library in Raleigh's Capital District to learn more about Halifax and its plantations. I browsed through books and maps, searching for photos and any information that would give me a basic understanding of North Carolina slave law during the time of Addy's escape to freedom. I then spent the rest of the morning exploring the North Carolina Museum of History, where I learned more about the institution of slavery. Addy and her family would have been one of the 331,000 people enslaved on a North Carolina plantation in 1860. Like her brother Sam and father Ben, Addy could have also been sold to another plantation owner, which is why she and her mother decided to flee to freedom. In 1864, the year Addy and her mother fled from North Carolina, the Civil War was still raging. 100 years after the war ended, Melody would be the American girl who would pick up where Addy left off and continue the fight for Black civil rights. After a few hours at the museum, I made my way northeast to historic Halifax to learn about the enslaved and free Black communities that lived there. Historic Halifax was a political center during the American Revolution and was the site of the signing of the Halifax Resolve on April 12, 1776.
Was developed around Halifax. Blacks provided the labor force on which the economy of the region was based. Though slaves made up the largest part of the black population, Halifax had an unusually high percentage of free blacks. Many owned property and were generally farmers, though some were skilled craftsmen, such as coopers, carpenters, and blacksmiths.
Preserved in historic Halifax is the home of a wealthy landowner, a clerk's office, a jail, as well as a tavern. As I explored, I saw bunches of real cotton throughout the patches of grass. These establishments were built decades before Addie's birth, but it was so interesting to see the town she might have crossed through in order to get to freedom. At sunset, I began the walk on a trail that has been documented as one of the paths used as a part of the Underground Railroad. These runaway slave ads were used to try to find those enslaved who fled to freedom. It was surreal walking down the path that the enslaved had taken centuries before. It was also eerily quiet. I could hear birds and other animals shifting in the trees. And it made me realize how important it was to be quick and quiet, because nature could unknowingly give away your whereabouts. The Roanoke River is 410 miles long. It runs through southern Virginia and northeastern North Carolina. It was the site of early settlement in the Virginia and Carolina colonies. The Roanoke River Valley was also the home to different indigenous communities. Halifax is also the site of North Carolina's 4th Provincial Congress. On April 12, 1776, the Congress unanimously adopted the Halifax Resolves, making the colony the first to recommend independence from England. Driving past these cotton fields at sunset was an emotional experience, to say the least.
They cut it into sections and actually moved it on a flatbed using a trailer like this to...
Oh, interesting. My last day in Halifax consisted of a docent tour of the Sally Billy House led by Frank McCannon. The Sally Billy House was built in 1804. Billy and Sally Smith bought the house in 1834, and when Smith died in 1845, the estate consisted of 12,000 acres of land and 266 enslaved people.
Say that the kitchens were separate because of danger of fire, but you have fires in all of these rooms anyway, just to heat them. So a lot of times here in North Carolina, the kitchens are separate.
The Halifax County Jail was a dreary two-cell facility. The steel doors and steel-covered windows were said to be inescapable. After a final stroll around the grounds, Addie and I picked up and headed to Colonial, Williamsburg, Virginia. Colonial Williamsburg, Virginia is the largest living history museum. Being there, I really did feel like I had stepped back in time. I also met people that were so happy that I brought Addie along with me to explore. I spent a few hours walking through the town and various buildings, homes, and gardens. Then, at night, I took one of their ghost tours. Addie was too afraid, so I left her back at the hotel. I did stay on the grounds at Colonial Williamsburg Resort, and here is some footage of my room as well as my view. The next morning, we got up bright and early and drove 152 miles north to Washington, D.C., where we spent the evening playing on the National Mall. Then the next day, we visited the National Museum of African American History and Culture. While at the museum, I focused on exhibits that would have provided me with information about what America was like during the years of Addie's life. In 1910, when this photo was taken, Addie would have been in her 50s. I imagined how she might have been a leader of a women's group in Philadelphia. We then drove 8 miles south to Alexandria, Virginia, to visit the Contraband and Freedom Cemetery Memorial, which served as the burial place for approximately 1,800 enslaved who fled to Alexandria to escape bondage during the Civil War. In 1864, the year Addie escaped to freedom, that was when the first burial took place. In 2015, the National Park Service included the cemetery in the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom Trail. A mile away from the cemetery is the Carlisle House Historic Park, which was the home of British merchant John Carlisle, one of the founders of Alexandria, Virginia. Carlisle kept a record of those he enslaved, and the record is available for viewing at the house as well as online. He began construction on the home in 1751. On August 1st, 1753, John and his wife Sarah Fairfax Carlisle moved into the finished home. Just a few minutes' walk from the Carlisle house is Old Town Alexandria, one of the original settlements of Alexandria. In 1837, an enslaved man by the name of James Curry fled to freedom via the Potomac River. Then on April 15, 1848, 77 enslaved people fled to freedom on a 54-ton Bay Crafts schooner called the Pearl. Unfortunately, those on the vessel were caught. Some of the passengers were sold back into slavery, and some had their freedom purchased by abolitionists. "109 miles later, we made it to Odessa, Delaware to visit the Corbett Sharp house.
Positively, and that, and she was from Cambridge, Maryland, so this would have been one of the areas. But Delaware was a slave state. Kent, Sussex.
Corbett Sharp is one of the houses documented as a safe house on the Underground Railroad.
To make for, and his descendants kept bills of the artisans. Like, we know how many bricks it took to build this house.
In 1845, Sam, an enslaved man from Maryland, was given food and shelter here at the Corbett Sharp house. When local authorities came to search the home, they could not find him because he was hidden in a small storage space that was covered by a stack of blankets and quilts. This is the door he entered. Then, at dusk, he set out to Philadelphia, where he later made it to freedom.
Yeah.
57 miles north, Addie and I finally made it to freedom and sought refuge at the Belmont Mansion in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The Belmont Mansion is the home of the Underground Railroad Museum. Once owned by Judge Richard Peters, the Belmont Mansion was used as a safe house for those on the run. Freedom seekers were hidden in the basement as well as the attic. The museum has an extensive amount of information about slavery, as well as testimonials from the formerly enslaved about the trauma they experienced during their time of enslavement.
Abama matafo bani na kwa wonsue ade no kure bayi wonwe obra ufu yesu abi amadu di amoya dio aladu ni mwenye ye mi yankubune.
I spent the rest of the day exploring other historic sites like the President's House site, where Presidents Washington and Adams once lived. You can also learn about the enslaved who once lived at this site, as well as those who fought for and fled to freedom. The Institute for Colored Youth is where Miss Dunn, Addie's teacher, went to school. It is also where Miss Dunn suggested that Addie and Harriet enroll in secondary school. This is one of the homes occupied by William Still, an African-American abolitionist who helped more than 1,000 freedom seekers like Harriet Tubman. I imagine that Addie would have shown up in his records as well. The next morning, Addie sat between Mama and her friend Sarah in the women's section of Trinity AME Church. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, filling the church with red, green, purple, and golden beams of light. Addie sat straight up and listened hard. It seemed as if Reverend Drake was speaking directly to her. Some of you pray for healing. Maybe you have a loved one who was wounded in the war or is sick in the hospital fighting for his life. You pray as hard as you can. God hears your prayers. He knows what hopes you have in your hearts. You know He answers prayers. Amen. Oh, Jesus,